Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Samechtet. On yesterday's daf, we saw the opinion of Rav Chisda, who learned from the pasuk Ki yeh leish ben, that in order to apply capital punishment to a ben sorer umoreh, the child, the ben sorer umoreh, has to have a father who is an adult, because it says leish ben, and therefore, if a minor, let's say a 12-year-old, has a child, and then 13 years later, that child grows up and acts like a ben sorer umoreh, no matter what he does, he will not get capital punishment because his father himself was a minor when that child was conceived. And so we learn from here that only an adult can, only if the father was an adult when the child was conceived, can you apply the law of ben sorer umoreh. So Rav Chisda's law assumes that it's biologically possible for a minor to conceive a child, but that isn't so clear. And now we're going to have a long discussion about whether or not this is possible, and it affects various laws. So we begin upeliga de Rabbah. Damar Rabbah katan eno molid. Rabbah said a general principle that a child, a minor, cannot bear a child. Shene'emad ve'im en la'ish goel v'chi yesh lecha adam b'Yisrael she'en lo goel ela begezel hager hakatuv b'daber. So Rabbah is going to learn it from the following law that has to do with someone who steals and then lies about it and then admits it. He has to pay back the capital plus 1/5. Who does he pay back to? The pasuk says he gives it back to the victim. If the victim's not around, not alive, he gives it back to a relative, the closest relative, even if it's far away. And if there's no goel, the pasuk says, if there's no redeemer, there is no relative, then you give it to a kohen. So we ask, is there a person in the Jewish nation that has no redeemer, no relative? Everybody has, even if they have no children and no brothers, they have a father. If the father is dead, they have an uncle, a cousin, a second, third cousin, fourth cousin, 10th cousin, 20th cousin. As long as there's two Jews alive, somehow they will be related to each other. So there has to be a goel. When is there not going to be someone who is a close relative, someone who is a relative? Ela begezel hager katuv medaber. Rather, the verse must be talking about someone who stole from a convert. A convert's biological relatives are no longer considered his legal relatives. So if someone steals from a convert and then the convert dies, so then he has to pay the kohen. Instead, the kohen is a representative of whoever was supposed to get that money. Ish. Now, furthermore, the pasuk says, "Ve'im en la'ish goel." If the victim is called a man, meaning an adult. Ish ata sarich lachzor alav im yesh lo goalin im b'im lav. Katan I ata sarich lachzor alav beyadua she'en lo goalin. And we learn from this that only if the victim was a man, so he's a convert and he's an adult, then you have to go and see if there are any relatives or not. But if he is a convert and a minor, then you don't even have to bother looking for any relatives, because surely there are none. Since he's a minor and he just converted, so his father, his brothers, anyone who was his relative beforehand don't count. And he cannot possibly have a child. So you see that this statement of Rabbah, this law of Rabbah, is assuming that a minor cannot have a child, because even if this convert is 12 and a half, it's not possible for him to have a baby. If it was possible, then you'd have to say, wait, let's check. He's 12. Maybe he conceived of a son somewhere along the line. Maybe he has a child. But we see that since you don't have to even look for a child, that means it's impossible for a minor to conceive. All right, now we have two opinions about this. Itibe Abaye. Abaye is going to challenge Rabbah from a baraita. Those are going to see in this baraita that it seems it is possible for someone under 13 years old to conceive of a child. It says, Ish, en li ela ish, ben tesha shanim v'yom echad, sheda'ud libi'a minayin, tamod omar ish. This pasuk is talking about someone who has relations, adulterous relations, with a shivcha charufa, someone who is half maidservant and half free, and she is married to another man. Now, that marriage is not a full marriage because she's half slave, half free, and therefore the adultery is not a full adultery, and therefore doesn't get the capital punishment. Instead, he will have to bring a sacrifice, and she will get lashes. Okay, that's the basic law. Now, the pasuk says ish, so I know that if the adulterer is an adult, then that would be the case, and they would get those punishments. But what if the adulterer is only 9 years old and 1 day? In that case, since it's a boy under 13, he will not have any punishment at all, not even a sacrifice. The question is, what about her? So since he's 9 days and 1 year, he's ra'ui libiyah. He can perform intercourse. He can complete intercourse. And so would we say that we should include the punishment for her as long as the adulterer is not only more than 13 for sure, but even over 9 years old? And the answer is yes. Talmud Omar ve'ish. The extra vav says yes, you even include that. So we see that a minor, someone who's a boy who's over 9, can do an act and complete intercourse. So doesn't that also mean that he can conceive a child? If he can complete intercourse and seed comes out, then that presumably that means that he can conceive a child. So that would be a challenge against Rabbah. Amar le yesh lo ve'eno molid. Rabbah says it's true that he can complete intercourse and some seed comes out, but it's not potent. That seed cannot impregnate someone, and therefore, yes, he would be liable because this is she would be liable because this is considered a sexual act, and she is an adult and she engaged in it knowingly. So she would be like, he's still not liable because he's under 13. But the point is, yes, even though he can do such an act, but the seed is not potent and will not have a child. Why? How do we know? And there's a parallel to that in agriculture. It's like a seed of a grain that was cut before it reached 1/3 of its growth. That wheat will have some seeds in it, but those seeds, if you plant them in the ground, won't grow because they're not mature yet. Debe Chizkiya Tana, V'chi yazid ish mezid umazriya, ven katan mezid umazriya. We have a proof for this concept from a beraita from the school of Chizkiya. The pasuk says that if someone comes intentionally, that's yazid, and he commits murder, and he goes and runs away to the mizbeach and holds on to it, you take him off the mizbeach and you give him capital punishment. There's no sanctuary for a murderer. That's the context. But we're going to take this out of context and say ki yazid ish. Ish means an adult. Yazid means that he can heat himself up and produce seed, whereas that in ish can do so, whereas a child cannot do so. So a child cannot bear seed. In other words, it's not viable. He can produce something, but whatever he produces is not viable seed that will produce a child. And so this supports the answer of Rabbah. Amar le Rab Mordechai le Rav Asher, my mashmat hay mezid li shana de bishulehu tichtiv vayazed Yaakov nazid. And Rav Mordechai asks Rav Asher, from where do you see that the word mezid means to cook up, or to get ready, to heat up, to make something prepared for use and able to be potent? Where do you see that this word means? That usually just means when you do something on purpose. And he said the answer is because Yaakov, he cooked up a stew, and he uses an interesting word, vayazed, Yaakov nazid. You can think of this in a literary way, that Yaakov kind of cooked up a plot. He was bimezid. He knew that Esav would be tired and he would want and hungry, and then he was a short-term thinker, and he would give up his bechorah for some soup. So Yaakov had this plan. So you can read that into this word vayazid. But for here, we are learning from it that vayazid means to cook something and make it ready for use. In that case, it's for eating. In this case, it means that an adult is able to produce seed that will be viable, that can produce a child. But a child that cannot, a child who cannot do that, even if he can produce something, is not something that is will conceive a child. And so that supports Rabbah's answer. And so, in fact, we can answer for Rabbah that you're right. A minor cannot conceive a baby. Hold on, we have a beraita from the school of Rabbi Ishmael that regarding Ben Sorer, it says Ben, that the one who will be killed as a ben sorer moreh has to be a minor, or around 13, whatever, but he cannot be a father. In other words, if the ben sorer moreh who we're going to kill is himself a father, and he's only 13 or so, but if he conceived of a baby, then we do not kill him. So that means it is possible for a minor to have a child, because let's try to figure out exactly how old he is. See, if he already has 2 hairs, then that's already considered an adult, and so then no one has a problem with that an adult can have a child. So the question is, when did he conceive the child, and when was the child born? So in order for this not to be a rejection of Rabbah, it has to be that the conception happened after the person, the defendant here, developed 2 hairs, because 2 hairs is already an adult. We'll just call that 13 years old as an average. So if we say that he impregnated someone after he had 2 hairs, and then the child was born before he finished growing around, rounding out his beard, so it was the entire time when he can be a ben sorer moreh, if it was, let's say, more than 9 months, and so he conceived the child and it was born during that time, and during that time this person did ben sorer moreh stuff, and you're saying, well, he's a father, so we can't kill him. Is that the case of Rabbi Ishmael? Is there enough time between 2 hairs and rounding out the beard? Is that more than 9 months? It's not. The entire period when someone could be a ben sorer moreh is only 3 months. In other words, between 2 hairs and a rounded beard is only 3 months. So you couldn't possibly bear a child, grow a child in that time. Rather, it must be that the child was conceived before he had 2 hairs. See that he's still a minor, and then he gave birth. The woman that he was with gave birth while he was during the ben sorer moreh time period, and then he did the ben sorer moreh stuff, and that's what Rabbi Ishmael is teaching us, that one cannot kill that person because he's a father. It has to be a ben and not a father. But we see from here that since the conception has to be before he's 13, that a minor is able to conceive a child. Isn't that a good proof? And we answer, Lo. Leolam di'abar batar da'aite shete sarot, ve'olid batar da'akif zakan. It really could be that he conceived a child after he had 2 hairs and was born 9 months later after he's already an adult, after he's out of the window of ben sorer moreh because he rounded out his beard. And that which you asked above from Rabbi Krus Pedai, who said that the whole time period is only 3 months, we have an answer to that, because when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said that in the West, when they learned des baraita, that says ben and not a father, it doesn't just mean that he has to be a son and not a father. It means a son and not someone who could be called a father. And when a boy has the possibility of conceiving a child, then he is already called a potential father, even though he doesn't actually have a child. And even if he did not make a woman pregnant, he's not even an expectant father. The fact that he could be a father is already excluded from the law of ben sorer umoreh. And so that's what the baraita of Rabbi Ishmael is talking about when it says ben and not an av. It's not talking about only excluding someone who's actually a father. Actually, that couldn't possibly be the case, according to this view, that a minor cannot conceive a child, but rather it's talking about a case where this boy had impregnated someone after he saw 2 hairs, so that's already an adult, and he couldn't do so beforehand anyway. And then over the next 3 months, while he is in this window of opportunity to be a ben sorer sorer umore. Since he could impregnate someone, so therefore he is out of the league of a ben, and there's already the potential of, and so would not be killed. We'll define this a little better in the next section, that the 3-month window for a ben sorer umore matches up with the 3 months, which is the average usual time when you can notice that someone is pregnant. And that's what we're going to see right now. Gufa, amar Rabbi Kirus bedai, amar Rabbi Shabbetai. Kol yamav shel ben sorer umore enan ela shelosha chodashim belvad. So now we're going to go further into the statement of Rav Kuspedai. We saw a little bit of it before. And the name of Rabbi Shabbetai, that all of the time of a ben sorer umore, meaning the window of opportunity for someone to be killed as a ben sorer umore, is only 3 months. Now we ask, V'anan tenan, our Mishnah said, Mishayavi, Sheteh Sa'adot Vad Shekif Zakan. But our Mishnah said that is from the time that he sees 2 hairs until he rounds about his beard. So that could be longer. So why is he saying only 3 months, right? How do you know how long that will be? And so the answer is, he keeps Zakan afagav de la malu shelosha chodashim, malu shelosha chodashim afagav de lo hikif. What Rabbi Kuspedai is saying is that 3 is actually the maximum no matter what. And it's whichever comes first. If his beard was rounded out, even before 3 months, then that's it. He's out of the law of ben sorer umore. Or if 3 months came first, even though he did not round out his beard, then that's it. He is also exempt from being a ben sorer umore. So therefore, 3 months is going to be maximum. It actually could be even shorter. Yatib Rabbi Yaakov min har pekod kamed Ravina. V'yatev kamar mishmed Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua. So Rabbi Yaakov from Nahar Pekod was sitting before Ravina, and he was saying in the name of Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, the following: Shema mina mid Rabbi Kirus bedai amar Rabbi Shabbetai yoledet l'shib'a and ubara nikad l'shlish yameha. We can derive from the statement of Rabbi Kirus bedai that if a woman gives birth after 7 months, they believed back then that it's possible for a woman to give birth to a viable live baby after 7 months of pregnancy or after 9 months of pregnancy, but not 8. The reason for that is a separate discussion. But anyway, the question is, if it's a 9-month pregnancy, then a woman shows, you can tell she's pregnant after 3 months, which is 1/3. The question is, if it's a 7th-month pregnancy, when does she start showing? Is it also after 3 months, or is it after a third? Is it always a third, which would be 2 1/3 months? That's the question that they were wondering about. And he says, we can figure out from Rabbi Kuspedai that a 7th-month pregnancy, you cannot tell that she is pregnant after a third of the time, meaning after 2 1/3 months, she still won't be showing. Rather, you still have to wait the 3 months. So that's the same. The 3 months is the same, no matter if it's a 7-month or 9-month pregnancy. Now, how can we tell this from Rabbi Kuspedai? Because if a 7-month pregnancy would show after just a third of the time, after 2 1/3 months, then why is the window of opportunity for ben sorer umore 3 months? 2 1/3 months should be sufficient. He's making a few assumptions here. He's assuming that the law that we saw before, that it has to be a ben and not an av, means that he can't be a potential father. And he's also assuming that a potential father, one can conceive a child once they have 2 hairs. So that's the first moment. But they're still not going to be called a potential father until the mother, potential mother, would be showing. And so he's within the law of ben sorer umore from the time that he can conceive until she would be showing. Because during that time, you can't call him a potential father because we have no idea if he has impregnated someone. But after 3 months, then if he had impregnated someone, then we would know. And then he's called a potential father. And the potential father is out. So whether he did or not, even if he didn't, since he could have conceived a child after 2 hairs, and then 3 months later already had a woman who is showing, so then that's called potential father, but not before that. Now, he said 3 months, but if it's possible that someone could be showing earlier, and here, if it would be a possibility that a 7-month baby would be showing after 2 1/3 months, then we should say, well, he's a potential father after 2 1/3 months, because he could be with a woman who has a 7th-month pregnancy, and she would be showing after 2 1/3 months, and then he would be called a father or potential father. And if so, whether he does or not doesn't matter, since there's a possibility that he could impregnate someone after 2 hairs, and then but would be known and showing after 2 1/3 months, and the window should be 2 1/3 months, not 3, and therefore a 7-month baby is not showing until it's after 3 months. Isn't that a good proof? And Ravina answered, no, it could be that it's for a 7-month baby. In fact, it shows after 2 1/3 months. But we follow the majority when we're going to make a law. And what's the window of opportunity? When someone is called a son and not potentially even a father, we'll follow the usual pregnancies, which are 9-month pregnancies and showing after 3. We're not going to go after the unusual case to define this. But then they repeated this answer in front of Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua. They repeated what Ravina said, and he said, "Is that true that in capital cases we follow the majority? As the pasuk says, the congregation will judge, and the congregation will save the person. And we learn from here that the judges should do everything possible to save the defendant from capital punishment. And so we should, if there's a possibility that we can make the window of opportunity smaller for giving capital punishment to a ben sura moreh and reduce it from 3 months to 2 1/3 months, then we should do that. You're telling me we should follow the majority? No, we don't follow the majority. If there's any possibility that this person was not guilty, even if it's less than the majority possibility, but it's possible that he was not. It could be that he is a potential father, because it could be that he caused a 7th-month pregnancy, and potentially he could do so. So therefore, he's a potential father after 2 1/3 months. So we don't follow a majority when it comes to a capital case, and therefore he questioned Ravina's answer. Ahadruha kamed Ravina, and so the rabbis came back to Ravina and asked him again about this question. Ravina told them, and is that true, your assumption, that in capital cases we don't follow a majority? Here's an example where we do follow a majority, V'hatenan, a Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin that we saw already. Echad omer b'shnayim b'chodesh, v'echad omer b'shlosha, adutan kayemet, sheze yodea be'iburo shel chodesh, v'ze eno yodea. If you have 2 witnesses, and one of them said the incident, let's say a murder, he says, I happened on the 2nd day of the month. And the other witness says, happened on the 3rd day of the month. We accept their testimony, even though they are divergent, because we assume that one of them knew that the previous month was intercalated and the other one didn't. And so it's easy to make that mistake, especially in the beginning of the month, like the 2nd and the 3rd. The news didn't spread yet which day is Rosh Chodesh. So one is assuming the previous month was 29 days. One is assuming that previous month was 30 days. He heard that they did add a day, and therefore we lined them up. That's what the Mishnah says. And if you say that we don't follow the majority of cases, then here we should worry about the minority possibility that each one of them was saying Davka. They knew the date, and one was saying specifically the 2nd. They knew when Rosh Chodesh was. Another one was saying specifically the 3rd. And therefore, it's a contradiction in their testimony, because that is possible that they're actually contradicting. It could be. In some cases they know, some cases they don't know when Rosh Chodesh was. Now, while it's true that a minority of people, they're following the calendar, they're always making sure they're the first ones, they're right outside the courthouse, and they want to know when Rosh Chodesh is. They already know on Rosh Chodesh or on the second day. They're already aware of it. Some people, a few people, but most people are not aware of when Rosh Chodesh is until later in the month when the news spreads. So over here, it's because the reason why we accept their testimonies was because we follow the majority of people, and the majority of the people make a mistake regarding when Rosh Chodesh was, especially in the beginning of the month. And so here is an example where we do follow the majority and we will kill someone, even though if you follow any possible minority, we would say, oh, it could be that one is saying second, one is saying the third, and they know when Rosh Chodesh was, and therefore it's a divergence and a contradiction, and we should throw the whole thing out and not kill the person. We might think that, but we don't say that. We follow the majority of people who don't know, and therefore we line it up. And so too here, Ravina would say that we follow the majority of pregnant women who show after 3 months, even if it's possible that a 7th month pregnancy might show after 2 and a 3rd month. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But even if that were the case, we don't have to follow that minority of cases and to say that a Ben Surah Moreh is considered a potential father even after 2 and a 3rd month, even though it's possible. There are some people that are showing pregnancy and therefore he could be a potential father and be called an Av and not a Ben. But we don't follow that minority opinion, since most women who, when they get pregnant, they show after 3 months. So we say that a boy becomes a potential father only 3 months after he sees 2 hairs, because that's when he is called a potential father. Because if he conceived a child right after he had 2 hairs, then she would be showing 3 months later. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah midifti, afana nami tanena, bat 3 shanim v'yom echad mitkadeshet bebi'ah, ve'im ba'a aleha yabam kena'a, ve'chayevin aleha mishum eshet ish. Rabbi Yirmiyah midifti says, I also have a baraita from which I can prove that one follows a majority even in capital cases. And so here is actually it's a Mishnah. Bat 3 shanim v'yom echad. If a girl is 3 years and 1 day or older, if she is in an act of intercourse, that is considered a legal act for all kinds of various applications. Number 1, if someone does kiddushin through bi'ah with a girl, less than 3, not considered an act, because that's just nothing. If bitulim will grow back, but 3 and more, the bitulim will be broken, and so that's considered an act. So that would be they would be married. They would have full kiddushin. V'im ba'aleha yavam kena'ah. If she was married and then her husband died without children, then someone else comes and does yibum, even though she's between 3 and 12, nevertheless that would be a full marriage. If she is married in any of these ways, either through kiddushin or through yibum, that's considered a full marriage. And if another man would sleep with her, that would be considered eshet ish, adultery, and he would get punished. Of course, she wouldn't, because until she's 12, she wouldn't get a punishment. But the point is that that act is considered legally a sexual act. If she is a nida, the law is that a woman who's nida, she transfers tumah in various ways. One of the ways is through bi'ah, and ba'ala, the man who is with her, will get also a high level of tum'ah, such that anything he sits on will become tameh, even the cushions all the way down. And so that's only true if you consider it an act of bi'ah, and we do consider it even if she's between 3 and 12. Nised lechohen ochelet bitruma. If she's married to a kohen, she can eat terumah because it's considered a full marriage. Even though she's a bat Israel, since this is a full marriage, she can eat terumah while she's married to a kohen. If someone that she's not allowed to be with, like a mamzer, she has relations with a mamzer, then that makes her invalid to marry a kohen in the future, because that bi'ah is considered a full act. And if she is involved in an incestual relationship, relationship, any of the arayot, including like a close relative, even if she's not married, that would be equally prohibited. Then the man who is an adult would get a death penalty. She would not get any penalty because she's a minor. So anytime she's between 3 and 12, on the one hand, it is considered an act, and however, she's not punished, but it's an act that's of prohibition for the man. And therefore, he would get the death penalty. Okay, so we quoted this whole Mishnah. What's the point? So we ask, Amai, Ema Ailoniti v'adata dahachi la kadish. Why do we say that we're going to give the man a death penalty in these cases? Maybe it's not a full marriage. Well, specifically, we're talking about here the eshet ish, right? The man will be liable to eshet ish. Well, if it turns out later on, we won't know when she's a minor, but if it turns out that she's an Ailonit, that means she's a woman who's barren and undeveloped, and she won't develop. In that case, we say it's a mekach ta'ut. The man will say, "I thought I was marrying a woman who is fertile, and turns out, look, she's barren. So I never would have married her in the first place, and therefore that kiddushin is nullified." And there never was a marriage. And therefore, if she was with another man after that marriage, and it'll end up not being adultery because that marriage retroactively is annulled. So if she's, however old, between 3 and 12, and she does some kind of kiddushin or yibum, and we say, okay, this is a full marriage. But we don't know. In the majority of cases, it'll be a full marriage, but there's a minority of cases in which we will learn later on that she's an Ailonit. And the man, when he did kiddushin, he said, no, I didn't want an Ailonit, and therefore she was never married, and therefore we cannot give capital punishment to the adulterer. So there's a proof that we follow the majority of cases, since the majority of women are not Ailoniyot. Therefore, we say, oh, well, it's most likely this marriage is going to stick. Even though she did kiddushin when she was a minor, she's probably not an Ailonit, and therefore she's fully married, and therefore the adulterer will get capital punishment. So here's another case where we can prove that we follow the majority in capital cases. But we reject this proof. Lo, mai chayav aleha dekatani korban. When it says that if a girl, between 3 and 12 does kiddushin through bi'ah or yibum, and then she commits adultery, that the man is liable. It didn't say liable to capital punishment. It means only liable to a sin offering. For a sin offering, that we follow the majority. We're talking about only capital punishment is the problem, because once you kill someone, like this is, you need a higher level of proof. And even if there's some possibility that it's not him, right, we don't just accept any circumstantial evidence. And so even some possibility, we try to exonerate someone that's accused of capital punishment. So, but for korban, we follow the majority, and that's what this Mishnah means. We follow majority for korban, but not for capital punishment necessarily. Okay, fine. So you can't prove it from that clause, but later on it says Veha mumatin al yada katane. In the last clause of the Mishnah, it says any of the arayot that she is involved in that are prohibited, you kill the man because of her. I mean, not because of her, it's his fault because he's an adult. But the point is that any arayot relations that this girl between 3 and 12 has with some adult, you kill the adult. So we're not just talking about a sin offering, we're talking about capital punishment, even though it could be she's an Ailonit when she grows up. And so we answer, Beba'aleha aviha. No, that clause that says arayot is talking about incest, for example, with her father. There, it doesn't matter if she's married or not. It has nothing to do with marriage. It doesn't matter if she's an Ailonit. Even if she's a for sure Ailonit, incest is still incest. And therefore, that father in that case would get capital punishment. And so that's what it's talking about. But indeed, if it was a matter of adultery, then it could be she's an Ailonit, and we would worry about a minority, so there's no proof. But then we say, no, but it says, if any of the arayot, and doesn't that include also adultery? If you say kol arayot, that includes the case of adultery, so it must be for adultery. adultery, also we kill the person. And so then this would be a good proof that we follow the majority and we don't worry about the minority possibility that she's an Ailonit. So in the end we say it's not a proof because it could be it's talking about a case where the man, the husband, the rightful husband, he accepted her no matter what. He said, listen, I don't care if you're an Ailonit or not, I accept this full Kiddushin. The only reason why, in general, we say that if she turns out to be an Ailonit, then we go back and say, Mekach ta'ut. The man, usually we can assume, would say, I want to have children. And I never would have done this Kiddushin if I knew she was an Ailonit. So that's why it's Mekach Ta'ut, so it's undone retroactively. But if he says specifically, I will accept her upon myself, even if she turns out to be an Ailonit, then the marriage is a total marriage. And so that's the case that we're talking about. Only in that case would we give an adulterer capital punishment. But indeed, if he didn't say I accept it unconditionally, and there was a even minority possibility that she could be an Ailonit, then we would not kill him. At least it's possible to interpret the Mishnah that way, and therefore this proof does not turn out to be an absolute proof, but we do have the proof beforehand from Ravina. The Gemara now returns to the subject of whether a minor boy under 13 is it possible for him to conceive a child. And we're going to try to prove it from this baraita that teaches Tenorabanan. Ham solelet bibna katan ve'aira ba. Bet Shammai omrim pesala mina kehuna o bet Hillel machshirin. If you have a mother who is problematically fooling around with her own minor son, and during the course of doing that, they initiate sexual intercourse. This is incest. Bet Shammai says that this causes her to be invalid to marry a Kohen. She is involved in prohibited relations, so now she cannot marry a Kohen after that. And Bet Hillel says no consequences, not to the boy and not to the mother. And this is strange. Why not? Since this is incest, the mother should get capital punishment. The boy is a minor, so he gets no punishment. But how come the mother does not get capital punishment? So we have to figure this out. Amar Rabbi Chia bered Rabba bar Nachmani Amar Rav Chisda. V'amri le Amar Rav Chisda Amar Ze'iri. Okay, some of these sages, different traditions of who said this, explain. Everybody agrees that if the boy is 9 years old and 1 day or older, in that case, this act is considered a sexual act, and therefore the mother will be killed. That's for sure. That's a simple case of arayot, and if a boy is over 9 years old, then he can perform such an act. Pachot meben shemoneh she'en biato bi'ah. And if he's under 8 years old, if he's 7, 6, 5, then his act is not an act, even though technically so the member touched her in some way, but that's not considered a sexual act. He's too young to be able to have intercourse, and therefore there would be no punishment at all. The mother would not even be invalidated to marry a Kohen. Lo nechliku ela beben shemoneh. Bet Shammai sabri gamrinan midorot harishonim. Bet Hillel sabri lo gamrinan midorot harishonim. The machlokah between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai is when the boy is precisely 8 years old. In that case, Bet Shammai says we learned from earlier generations. We're about to prove that in earlier generations it was possible for a boy to conceive a child, even though it is not possible in later generations. So Bet Shammai says even though nowadays it can't happen, since in earlier days it could happen, we do consider it somewhat of an act of intercourse, and therefore it will make her pasul for a Kohen. But since nowadays it's not possible for a boy to have a child at 8 years old, therefore there's no capital punishment. So it's a kind of in between. And Bet Hillel says no, even though, yes, it's true that in early generations, as we're about to try to prove, it was possible for an 8-year-old to conceive a child, but that was in a different generation, a different time, different nature, and we do not learn from that time, and therefore nowadays 9 is the cutoff time. Anything under 9 is not considered an act, and therefore there will be no consequences. Of course, it doesn't mean it's permitted, but the point is that there's no punishment for it. Now, where does the proof that in earlier generations a boy 8 years old was able to have a child? If et Uriah Hitti. Okay, this is going to be a long quotation of various Pesukim that we're going to try to prove the following 4 generations of parent and child happened within a relatively short amount of time that would require them to be 8 years old. Okay, so we have to follow through. We're going to follow the whole chronology. But here's the family we're talking about. Batsheva, Shlomo's mother. So that's already one generation, Batsheva to Shlomo. And her father was Eliam. And Eliam's father, Uchtiv Eliam, ben Achitophel Hagiloni. Eliam's father was Achitophel. So we have 4 generations here. Achitophel, Eliam, Batsheva, King Shlomo. Okay, so now let's see let's see when he was born. King Shlomo Uchtiv Vayishlach biyad Natan HaNavi Vayikra et Shemo Yedidya Ba'abur Ki Hashem Ahevo. Okay, when he was born, the prophet Natan comes and he gives him a name Yedidya. Okay, so that's in Shemuel Bet, chapter 12. That's when he's born. And now we're going to we're not quoting all the Pesukim, but only Pesukim that mention a time lapse. And so we're going to add them all up. Uchtiv Vahi Lishnatayim. Well, the point is we're adding up to see how old was Shlomo, King Shlomo, when Achitophel, his great-grandfather, died. And based on that, and knowing how old Achitophel was when he died, we can calculate how old Achitophel was when King Shlomo was born. So that's what we're going to try to do, and then we'll have to see how 4 generations of people can fit into that time period. Okay. Vayhi lishnatayim yamim vayu gozizim le'Avshalom. Uchtiva Avshalom barach vayelech geshura vayhisham shalosh shanim. So after 2 years, so 2 years after King Shlomo was born, Avshalom was shepherding, was sheep shearing, and then Amnon was killed, and it says Avshalom ran away, and he went to Geshur, and he was there for 3 years. So that's 2 years plus 3 years. That makes 5 years. Then he wanted to come back, so he came back to Jerusalem, but the King David would not see him, and that was for 2 years. So we had 5 plus 2. Now we're up to 7 years. And after this is the time of Avshalom rebelling against his father. Now this 40 years, this is counting to something else. This is from the beginning of the kingship when they asked Shemuel for a king. So don't worry about this number. This is not part of the addition. This is counting from before, an event before Shlomo was born. From Avshalom el Hamelech el Chana v'Shelamat Nidri asher nadati laHashem bechevron. And so Avshalom makes an excuse that he wants to go to Hebron because he wants to give a sacrifice, and that's his excuse to get out of there and start a rebellion. Uchtiv Achitophel rakilo ne'esta asato ve'achaboshet hachamor vayakom vayelech el beto ve'liro vaysav et beto vayechanek. And during this rebellion, Achitophel was asked advice, and his advice was not taken, and he was so depressed he went and he committed suicide. Okay, so he committed suicide at the same time that King Shlomo was 7 years old. Okay, good. So now we know that King Shlomo was born 7 years before his great-grandfather Achitophel's death. Now, how old was he when he died? Uchtiv anshe damim mirma lo yechesu yemehem. V'tanya kol shnotav shel doeg enan ela 34 v'shel Achitofel enan ela 33. The pasuk in Tehillim that says, deceitful people will not live out half their days. If we assume that average lifetime is 70 years, that means evil people die before 35. There's a Baraita that teaches Doeg, he was an evil guy, and he died at 34 years old. Now Achitofel, he died at 33 years old. Pesukim don't say how old he was, but we learn from here that he was 33 years old. Kama havyalehu telatin utlat. So how many years did he live? Well, we just said 33 years. Dal sheva dahava Shlomo. How old was he when Shlomo was born? Well, subtract 7 years. Pashlu esrim vishit, and we get 26 years old. So we see that Achitophel was 26 years old when King Shlomo was born. Now, during that time, you would have Achitophel, during 26 years, Achitophel would have to, after he was born, he would have to grow up to be old enough to sire a child, and then it would be 9 months of pregnancy, and then his son, Ilam, would have to grow up, sire a child, 9 months of pregnancy, and then Bathsheba would have to grow up, conceive a child, and give birth, and King King Shlomo would then, and at that point, King Shlomo was born. So we need all these three things. Three people have to grow up and conceive a child within 26 years. Now, of those 26 years, you're going to have 3 periods of 9 months of pregnancy. Even if you say there were 7-month pregnancies, so a short one, still that'll be 21 months. So anyway, we're taking away 2 years for the pregnancies, so 2 years for the 3 pregnancies altogether, and we end up with 24 years. So we need 3 people that have to grow up within 24 years and be able to conceive a child. So if we split that evenly between the 3 people, it's 8 years old. Achitophel must have been 8 years old when he conceived a child, and then Eliam grew up and he was 8 years old when he conceived of Bathsheba, and Bathsheba was 8 years old when she conceived of King Shlomo, and then that we already included the 9 months of her pregnancy. And so we see that, yes, a boy can conceive at 8 months. So this is a proof that, yes, they can, right? Mimai, maybe not. Dilma tarvahu bit sha olid, ubat sheva olida beshit. Mishum de iteta bari, teda, deha, havela, valad meikara. No, maybe not. Maybe, in fact, Achitophel and Eliam, the boys, were in fact 9 years old. And Bathsheba, she gave birth earlier when she was 6. Because women are stronger and women can conceive at an earlier age than men can impregnate a woman. And so therefore there's no proof from here that a boy can conceive a child at 8 years old. Could be that they were 9 and she was 6. In fact, this was Bathsheba's second pregnancy and child, because she already had a child before that died as an infant. And so, yeah, she definitely might have been younger, and therefore there is no proof from here. So we're going to try a different proof. Ela mehacha, ele tolodot terach holidet Abram et Nachor ve'et Haran. Ve'Abram gadol me'Nachor shana, ve'Nachor gadol me'Haran shana. Nimsa Abraham gadol sheteh shanim me'Haran. Uchti vayikach Abram V'Nachor lahem nashim. Says that Terach had 3 children, Abram, Nachor, and Haran. Let's assume that these are in chronological age order. And let's assume also that they were born 1 year apart. So Abraham is 1 year older than Nachor, and Nachor is 1 year older than Haran. That makes Abraham 2 years older than his brother Haran. Now it says that Abraham and Nachor married women, and Abraham married Sarai, and there's a tradition that Sarai is none other than the same as Yiska, and that's Haran's daughter. So Abraham, in other words, married his brother's daughter. He married Haran, the younger son, Haran's daughter Yiska. Now, why was Sarai called Yiska? V'amar b'Yitzchak, Yiska zo Sarah. Yiska is the same person. Abraham married his niece. Why was she called Yiska if her name was Sarah? Because she envisioned things by divine inspiration. That's why Hashem told Abraham, whatever Sarah tells you, you should listen to her, because she has Ruach HaKodesh. Another interpretation, Yiska also means seeing, but it's referring to other people that would gaze at her beauty. The Pasuk says that when Abraham found out that he was going to have a child, he fell on his face and laughed, and he said, I'm 100 years old, how can I have a child? And Sarah is 90 years old. So we learned from that Pasuk that how much older is Abraham from Sarah? 10 years older. And she is older than her father 8 years, because since Abraham is 100 and when she was 90, that means when Sarah was born, Abraham was 10 years old. And we already proved that Abraham is 2 years older than his brother Haran. And so that means when Sarah was born, Abraham was 10 and Sarah's father was 8 years old. Ishtakach Yoda Haran le Sarah bitmane olida. So we proved that Haran was 8 years old when he had a child. And so therefore, yes, in all older generations, in ancient generations, it was possible for a boy to have a child at 8 years old. Isn't that a good proof? And we say no. Mimai dilma Abraham zuta de'achu hava v'derech chochmatan kachashib lehu. It could be that Abraham was actually younger than his brother Haran, and it wanted to list them according to their wisdom, not in age order. And so, in fact, yes, Abraham was 10 years old when Sarah was born, but Haran was older. He was 11, 12. It was older than Abraham, and certainly he could have a child over 9. At least there's no proof that he was 8. So no, there's no proof that an 8-year-old can have a child, even in the olden days, from here. And we're going to prove that in other places, the Torah lists people not necessarily in chronological order, but rather according to their wisdom, according to their importance. Uchtiv, Vahi Noach ben 500 shana, Vayoled Noach et Shem, et Cham ve'et Yafet. We have a pasuk that Noach was 500 years old when he had children, and he had 3 children, Shem, Cham, and Yafet. So are these in age order or not? Well, let's see. If he was 500 years old when he had Shem, so then he would be a little bit older when he had Cham, and a little bit older when he had Yafet. Shem gadol mecham shana. So Shem is older than Cham 1 year. V'Cham gadol miyafet shana. Nimsa Shem gadol miyafet shete shanim. And Cham is older by 1 year from Yefet. So Shem, the oldest, is 2 years older than Yefet. Uchtiv, ve'Noach ben 600 shana v'hamabul haya mayim al haaretz. Now, Noach was 600 years old, so this is 100 years after he had Shem, and that's when the Mabul started. Good. Uchtiv, ve'ele toledot Shem, Shem ben me'at shana v'yodet et Arpachshad shenatayim la'achad hamabul. It says that this is now the family of Shem. Shem was 100 years old when he gave birth to Arpachshad, and that was 2 years after the Mabul. Now, this doesn't make sense, because if this was 2 years after the Mabul, then that's a time when Noach would have been 602. If Noach was 602, then Shem would have been 102, because it says here that Shem was born, if he's the firstborn, then he was born when Noach was 500. And so when Noach is 602, because that's 2 years after the flood, so he was 600 and it says 2 years after, then Shem should be 102. But here it says that Shem was 100. Ben me'ah shana, bar me'ah v'tarten shenin hava. Was he 100? No, he was 102. If you say that these are in order. Ela derech chochmatan kachashib lehu. Hachanameh derech chochmatan kachashib lehu. Rather, the only way to make sense of the children of Noach is to say that it puts Shem first because Shem is the greatest in wisdom, but not in age, and therefore regarding Avraham also, it put Avraham first, but he is not necessarily the oldest, and so there is no proof from here that even in the olden days that an 8-year-old can conceive of a child. Amar Rav Kahana, Amrita lishma'ata kamed Rav Zevid min dehar de'ah. Rav Kahana says, I repeated this, what you just said, to Rav Zevid in dehar de'ah. Amar li atun mehachamat nitu. He says, is that where you learned this law from, that this generalization from, that sometimes the names are not in chronological order? I have a different way of deriving the same thing. Ulshem yulad gamhu abi kol bnei Eber achi Yefet hagadol. Yefet hagadol shebe'echav haya hava. And actually, my proof is a lot simpler. It's from an explicit pasuk. It says to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Yefet, the elder. So you see that Yefet is called the oldest of the brothers. So obviously it's not in chronological order, Shem, Cham, and Yefet, because here it says Yefet was the oldest. And so this is an explicit way, an easier way of getting at the same point, that sometimes the Torah presents order of children, but not in chronological order. And since it's true of Noach's children, it could be also true of Terach's children. So therefore, we have no proof so far that even in the olden days, a boy of 8 can conceive a child himself. Ela min elan. So what is the proof? Because we still need to explain that baraita between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. We said it only makes sense if it's an 8-year-old can have a child. So we need a proof that in the olden days, an 8-year-old could have a child. So we're going to learn it from here. This will be a successful proof. Mehacha. Ubsalel ben Uri ben Hur lemate Yehuda uchti v'tamot mot Azuba eshet Kalev, vayikach lo Kalev et Efrat v'teled lo et Chur. We're focusing on Bezalel, the one who built the Mishkan. His father was Uri, and his father was Chur, and Chur's father was Kalev, we learn from this pasuk. So we have here 4 generations, Bezalel, Uri, Chur, and Kalev. Now, V'chi abad Bezalel Mishkan bar kamahave. How old was Bezalel when he made the Mishkan? That is in the first year when they left Egypt. He was bar tilesar. Dichtib ish memelachto asher hemma osim. He was 13 years old in that year when they left Egypt, because it says a man. Each man was doing his work in the Mishkan, so it has to be a man. So that's 13 years old. V'tanya shana rishona asam Moshe Mishkan. Shini Akim Mishkan v'shalach meragalim. They built the Mishkan during the first year, and then afterwards, the second year is when they sent the spies. So by that time, Bezalel would be 14. Uchti ben arba'im shana anochi b'shlach Moshe Ibed Hashem v'gomer v'ata anochi hayom ben 85 shana. Later on in Sefer Yoshua, Kalev says, I was 40 years old when Moshe sent the spies. Now I'm 85 years old. But the point is, it's 40 years old. So kama havya arba'in. So we see Kalev was 40 years old at the time when the spies were sent. That's the second year since they left Egypt. So that means, how old was Kalev when Bezalel was born? Well, Bezalel was 14 years old at the time. So Dal Arbesar Hava Bezalel Pesha Lehu Esrim Veshit. So subtract 14 years old, because Bezalel was 14 when Kalev was 40. And so we see that Kalev was 26 years old. Now, Kalev is the great-grandfather of Bezalel, and this goes with all boys. There's no girls here, so we can't say, she was a girl and she was 6 years old. So now we have these 3 pregnancies that have to happen in that time. So take off about 2 years. If it's 9 months, it's really going to be more. So we'll make it even less. But so 2 years for the 3 pregnancies, and that means that Caleb has to grow up and have a child, and his son all have to grow up and have children. So let's split the years evenly between 24 divided by 3. So each one had a child when they were 8 years old, and this is a final proof that in the ancient times it was possible for an 8-year-old to conceive of a child, and that's why Bet Shammai was machmir on an 8-year-old. Not that it's considered anymore, since it can't happen today. It's not a full act of intercourse for an 8-year-old, but since it could happen in the olden days, so Bet Shammai says that's enough to make the mother prohibited to a kohen, and Bet Hillel says we don't take into account the olden days, rather we take into account the situation currently. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.